Hey guys, I'm Annie and welcome to my YouTube channel. People seem to really have enjoyed my Lost Ark videos, thank you by the way for that. And since I'm still really enjoying the game, I figured I'd make another guide, and this time on the class I'm playing, the Sorceress. This video will focus on the basics of the Sorceress, with a focus on understanding the class, and introducing a build ideal for leveling, questing, and potentially even island farming. If you guys are also interested in endgame content builds, please let me know in the comments and maybe I'll make another video covering that. We don't want this video to be an hour long. Hope you find the video useful, and if you do, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and also hit the bell to not miss my future videos. The first thing that we'll take a look at is the Sorceress Identity. The identity is here at the bottom, between all the hotbars, and consists of the specialty meter and 2 abilities. The specialty meter is built up by using all your spells. So as you're playing, you'll just notice that it goes up. The specialty meter acts as the resource used by your Z and X abilities, so you want to keep an eye on that to know when you're able to use them. In terms of the Z and X abilities themselves, let's take a look at the first one. Your Z ability is called Arcane Rupture. Arcane Rupture is basically a big damage cooldown that you can use when your specialty meter is at 30%. You can also decide to keep it until 100% to make that buff even stronger. Let's take a look at what it does in action so we can see what the buff gives us. Pressing Z, and the magic enhancement buff gives me 10% damage increase and reduces my cast time. Let's also take a look at the Z ability when you have full specialty meter. Pressing Z, and we get Arcane Torrent, which increases our damage by 20% instead of 10, also reduces our casting time, gives a bunch of other bonuses, including 25% cooldown reduction, which is really nice by the way. Something to note is that when you use your Z ability, your specialty meter is drained over time, which means that you have a pretty good idea of how long your buff is still remaining. Alright, so we've taken a look at the Z ability, let's take a look at the X one. Here we have Blink. And Blink allows us to blink, which allows us to teleport to our mouse cursor. Just to showcase, 1, 2, 3. And then we have no more specialty meter left. The blink costs you 30%, which means at max specialty meter, you can use it 3 times. May not be ideal because you probably want to use it for your cooldowns instead to do more damage, but in sticky situations, it might be useful to have one. You may already know that by pressing space, you already have a blink, but this way you have another blink to make use of, which can even go a little bit further. Now that you know both how Z and X works, you may note that using Z together with blink depletes your specialty bar even faster, so you probably don't want to do that if you want to have a good amount of time actually doing damage. Now that we have an understanding of Sorceress Identity, I think it's a good time to quickly mention the 2 engravings that we have. The first engraving we have here is Igniter. Igniter basically buffs your Z ability, so that means your short cooldown windows suddenly become a lot stronger and a lot heavier on your enemies. On the other hand, we have Reflux. What Reflux does is almost the complete opposite. It basically disables your Z ability completely and instead gives you full freedom to blink as much as you want, since there's nothing else to use your specialty meter on. To make up for it though, your general damage is increased and your cooldowns are also reduced. So generally speaking, Igniter for the big damage windows and not so much outside of those, and Reflux being the consistent, constant damage overall. I won't be going into too many details when it comes to engraving, especially general engravings that you may want to use these with, but if that is something that's interesting for you, let me know in the comments and I will definitely make another video to cover all of the more endgame type of things. Main reason for not including it here is because endgame content covers so many different kind of builds. You have the raids, you have the chaos dungeons, you have the 2 engraving playstyles. It's just too much. If you, on the other hand, want to learn about the basics of what engravings are, I do have a video on that as well, so you can check it out if you want to learn about that. I'll also include the link in the description. But for now, let's look at how to build your character as you are leveling. A really good first spell to use is Blaze. Blaze is a flame that goes towards your cursor, and the main thing that makes Blaze so good is this first tripod here, damage amplification. This 6% buff helps all your party members with more damage, but not only that, it also buffs all your own abilities, and that's what makes it so strong. This makes Blaze a perfect first ability to use when you're about to engage some enemies. The same thing can be found on the Lightning Vortex, so if you want to have a second spell that has the same effect, just to increase the duration of that debuff on the monsters, then this is also an alternative. Keep in mind that the two buffs don't stack, but instead they just increase the duration. Another useful spell for leveling is the Seraphic Hail. Seraphic Hail does AoE damage by using a water wave, and you also have some pretty interesting tripods to make it even stronger. You first of all have Enlightenment, which increases your specialty meter gain so that you can jump into your Z more often, and you also want to go for this Explosion, which means that you do even more damage. Eventually, when you have enough points, you want to put some damage versus bosses. Keep in mind that putting spells into the third row is generally expensive in skill points, so sometimes you may want to prioritize putting 1 or 2 tripods into a new spell rather than picking the third row for the specific spell. For Seraphic Hail specifically, it's quite worth going for the third early on, as it's a low CD AoE spell, which is nice to buff early. For future spells, you can try to prioritize those that give magic amplification on the third row, as it's quite a nice buff for your main Z ability. Let's take a look at how this one changes the spell. We got the wave and the tripod explosion. Another thing that it's useful for is that the knockback can provide you just enough time to cast another big spell without getting hit or interrupted. The next interesting spell for leveling is Punishing Strike. It's a really powerful AoE damage, which also comes with a cast time. There's some interesting tripods for this as well, so let's take a quick look at them. You want to pick Wide Angle to make the area space bigger. You also want to go for Electric Discharge for even more damage, more explosions, and Magic Amplification to seal it for even more damage during your Z. And let's take a look at how the tripods has now changed it. So Punishing Strike, that's how it was before, bigger, and the extra explosion. The next interesting spell is Frost Call. This one actually changes quite a lot when putting points into the tripods, but let's take a look at how it is without them. A channeled ability with blizzard-like damage. Now let's put some points into the tripods. Here it is. We of course want to go for Enlightenment for specialty meter gains. Here in the second row is the interesting one. Changes to point and normal mode. So we're going for this for that change because it makes a big difference, and also a little bit of a damage buff. And over here we go for even more damage. So now with the tripods in place, this is how it looks like. No more channel. Instant cast, really useful, really strong, lots of damage, really easy to use. The next interesting spell you want to use is Explosion. And just as it sounds, this is a big damage ability. It's a big cast, goes forward, and explodes on a target, hopefully, if you don't miss. As a big damage source, the explosion tripods are also mostly focused on getting even more damage in. So you want to buff the damage against small mobs, you want to buff the damage against bosses, and you want to amplify your Z even more. So it doesn't look any different, but it just does more damage. Another really useful skill to have when leveling is Elegion's Touch. Elegion's Touch is basically a shield that drains your mana instead of your HP when you get hit. And since I never found myself ever running out of mana, might as well use it. The main reason though for having this is because of this very important tripod. 10% movement speed. As you might have experienced already, leveling is a lot of running around, and especially within buildings where you can't mount up, so having this extra speed means that you're saving a lot of time. As of the first row, I would go for recover 10% MP, just in case you may want some extra mana, and go for that speed. And that's how it looks like. The next spell to talk about is the Esoteric Reaction. This spell looks like this with no tripods put in place, and explodes after a while. There it is. As of tripods, let's take a look. We're gonna put some points into quick prep for this one, mana if you find yourself going but probably not, and some extra damage. As you're probably starting to reach the end of your leveling experience, you're probably not gonna have time to put in more points than that, so having those two is good enough. For the final spell for this build, I put Rime Arrow. I want to point out though that you could put something else if you'd prefer, such as Inferno, as at this point we probably don't have any points to put into the tripods, so you just play with whatever spell feels better to use. The rhyme arrow looks and feels like this. We've got icicles coming from the sky in a direction that you pick. Inferno, if you would prefer that, doesn't require the clicking of a mouse and simply puts a circular fire explosion where your mouse cursor is. Another decent option for your 8th spell is Reverse Gravity, and I can quickly showcase how this ability looks. Circle effect, which knocks enemies up, meaning it's really helpful also if you happen to get stuck in a corner somewhere and you're getting overwhelmed by too many mobs. And that's about it. Feel free to use this last slot to also try out the other spells, just to familiarize yourself with the sorceress in general, but overall you should have a really good build by going with these spells. To summarize, while leveling, you're investing into skills that deal heavy AoE damage. At the same time, you make sure to prioritize abilities that build up your specialty meter faster and tripods that buff your damage during your Z uptime. So at the end of the day, we're trying to deal as much damage as possible in those little special windows. This is the most ideal build for leveling, but if you're not a big fan of having damage output based around your Z uptime, you can adjust your tripods to make them less based around your Z uptime and instead just make them general damage buffs. So for example, your Punishing Strike has a tripod in Magic Amplification, but if you don't want to focus on doing damage during your Z uptime, you can switch it to this one, which increases your crit damage by 160% at all times instead. This is especially relevant if you want to go for the reflux engraving later on and might make the transition a little bit smoother. Before we wrap up the video, let's quickly take a look at all the skills that we've talked about and see how it all looks in action. Remember to always start with your blaze to apply the damage buff, and then you can go ahead and spam with all your other abilities, as you wish. Whew, that was a lot of stuff to take in. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, please let me know in the comments if there's something else that you'd like me to cover in my future videos, as I'd love to do more Lost Ark videos, whether it's another video on the sorceress with more in-depth stuff, or maybe something completely different. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you next time. Bye! And blink allows us to blink. Wait, what am I supposed to say about that?